December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes forest. It was the quietest place on Earth, until it wasn't.
The Allies thought the war was over. They were wrong. Dead wrong.
Hitler had one last insane card to play. A massive surprise attack to split the Allied armies in two.
But here is the secret. This massive beast was starving. It was doomed before the first shot was fired.
Their plan wasn't just to kill, it was to steal. They needed American gas to keep their tanks moving. Hitler banked everything on one thing: the weather. The fog grounded the mighty Allied Air Force.
5:30 a.m. The silence broke.
The bombardment lasted 90 minutes. It turned the white forest into a black graveyard.
The trap was sprung. But the Germans made one fatal calculation they didn't expect. The calculation was simple physics. The roads in the Ardennes were built for farmers, not for 60-ton monsters. Hitler's blitzkrieg stalled instantly. Not by enemy fire, but by a traffic jam from hell.
Every minute they sat idling, they burned precious fuel. Fuel they did not have.
The clock was ticking. They had 48 hours to reach the fuel depots, or the offensive would die.
On the other side, panic! The Americans were blind, deaf, and running for their lives!
But amidst the rout, small pockets of American resistance began to form, like islands in a Red Sea.
They didn't have orders. They didn't have winter coats. All they had was grit.
Boom! The German juggernaut crushed them. Speed was the only thing that mattered.
All roads led to one town, Bastogne. If Germany takes it, they win the West.
The Germans raced to the town thinking it was empty. But they were about to run into the 101st Airborne.
December 21st. Bastogne was cut off. An island of blue drowning in a sea of Nazi red.
Zero.
The German commander offered them a choice: surrender honorably, or be annihilated. General McAuliffe read the note. He didn't write a speech. He spit out one word: nuts!
The Germans were confused. Is that negative? The translator asked. It means go to hell.
The insult broke them. The Germans didn't just want to take the town anymore. They wanted to erase it!
Christmas Eve. The barrage began. Every square inch of Bastogne was hammered by steel.
The perimeter was collapsing. The Germans were inside the wire. It was hand-to-hand in the snow. They could hold for maybe one more hour. Then, a soldier looked up. The prayers were answered. The fog lifted.
Terror! They knew what was coming. They called them Jaws, the tank killers.
The sky fell on them. The Allied Air Force unleashed hell. 5,000 planes blackened the sun. The Tigers had no place to hide. The roads became slaughterhouses. Steel turned into coffins.
While the sky rained fire, a new threat roared from the south.
Patton did the impossible. He turned his entire army 90 degrees in 48 hours. He was coming for Bastogne.
The hunters became the hunted. The German offensive wasn't just stopped, it was being strangled.
They never reached the American gas depots. They were miles deep in enemy territory, with empty tanks.
They abandoned their machines. They were now just men walking home through hell.
But the Americans weren't taking prisoners.
Word spread through the lines like a virus. Malmedy. The Germans had murdered American prisoners.
Patton from the south, Montgomery from the north. They were crushing the German army in a giant vice. The counterattack was savage. The GIs didn't just push the Germans back, they hunted them down. The German generals begged to retreat, to save what was left. But from Berlin, one order came back.
Hold the line! Hitler refused to give up an inch of ground. He sentenced his own army to death.
The Americans burned them out, bunker by bunker, tree by tree. The forest turned into an inferno. The pride of the Third Reich lay rusting in the snow. It was the largest collection of scrap metal in history.
The Battle of the Bulge was over, but the road to Berlin was wide open, and the Americans were still hungry.
But Hitler had a secret weapon. Not a tank, not a bomb, but a lie.
Operation Reich. German commandos dressed as Americans, speaking perfect English, changing road signs.
Paranoia spread like a plague! No one trusted anyone! A wrong turn meant you were a spy!
While the Americans panicked, the German reality was pathetic. This wasn't a modern army. It was a museum piece.
80% of the German transport was horse-drawn in 1944 against the most mechanized army on Earth.
And the soldiers? Look closer. These weren't the supermen of 1940. They were children.
Old men and boys. Thrown into the meat grinder to buy Hitler a few more days.
By late January, the Bulge was gone.
But as the ground war died, a new terror was rising from the ashes. A weapon the world had never seen before.
The Me-262, the world's first jet fighter. It was faster than anything the Allies had. A ghost in the sky.
American pilots were stunned. They couldn't catch it. It was like fighting a spaceship with a biplane.
But a miracle weapon needs fuel. And these birds were thirsty. Most never even left the ground.
January 1st, 1945. The Luftwaffe gathered every last plane for one final massive suicide strike.
Disaster! The operation was so secret, their own anti-aircraft crews weren't told. They shot down their own planes!
It was the death blow. Not from the enemy, but from themselves. The Luftwaffe ceased to exist. While Germany scraped the barrel, American factories were printing planes like newspapers. The math was impossible. Hitler had thrown everything he had at the West. He forgot one thing. The back door was open.
The Soviet Union. While the Bulge collapsed, the Red Army launched an offensive that would shake the earth.
The trap was complete. Germany wasn't just losing. The Battle of the Bulge had consumed Germany's last reserves.
The order was absolute. Blow every bridge. Turn Germany into an island fortress. No American sets foot on the fatherland. But at Remagen, a miracle. The explosives failed. The bridge stood. The door was unlocked.
Within hours, 8,000 soldiers crossed. For the first time since Napoleon, a conquering army had crossed the Rhine.
The trap snapped shut. The Ruhr pocket.
They surrendered in waves. Entire divisions. Generals, privates, boys.
The road to Berlin was now a highway. The Americans had the speed, the fuel, and the fury.
Victory fever. They could smell it. Berlin was just days away. They thought they would be the ones to capture Hitler.
But then, a shock. General Eisenhower ordered the armies to halt. Berlin was left for the Russians.
While the Americans waited, the Russians unleashed hell on Berlin. 2 million shells.
Street by street, house by house. The Third Reich ended not with a bang, but with a scream. In his bunker, the dictator moved imaginary armies on a map. Armies that were already dead.
To the west, the shooting had stopped. The GIs thought the horror was over. They were wrong.
It started with a smell.
Eisenhower ordered every soldier to see it. Get it all on record now, he said, before some bastard says it never happened.
The guns went silent. The world celebrated. But looking back at the snow of the Ardennes, historians found a terrifying truth. By wasting his elite panzers in the forest, he left Germany defenseless. He shortened the war by 6 months.
But the cost of that speed was 19,000 American lives. The bloodiest battle in U.S. history.
They weren't super soldiers. They were teachers, farmers, clerks, thrown into the freezer without winter coats.
The lesson of the Bulge is eternal. Professionals talk logistics. Amateurs talk strategy. You can't fight a war on empty.
Today, the forest is quiet. The screams are gone. But the scars...
They saved the world. It sounds like a cliche, but in that frozen forest, they literally saved the world.
But for every cheering face, there was a ghost standing behind them. The ones who never came home.
The Battle of the Bulge was over. But for the survivors. And then, the world moved on. The snow melted. The tanks rusted.
Hitler is gone. But on the other side of the world, an even bloodier sun is rising. The Empire of Japan.